Hello students. My, this education sure is turning out to have a good long-term effect on your menopause. The individual lessons are important, but the most important thing of all is the long-term outcome. And long-term outcome is precisely what we'll address today with regard to endometrial uterine cancer. It's sort of like telling your fortune by looking into a crystal ball. And that's why I'm dressed as a fortune teller. This is video number 330, the 11th in our unit on endometrial uterine cancer. Now, as you know, all of chapter 31 in my book is on endometrial uterine cancer also. And if you want to know in general terms what your fortune will be in the event you get endometrial uterine cancer, watch this video. If you want to know your personal fortune tailored specifically to you, you'll need a consultation. Thus far in this unit on endometrial uterine cancer, I have taught you that endometrial uterine cancer is the most common gynecologic malignancy. You are at high risk for it if you are old, fat, and female. It is undeniably due to excess estrogen. It begins as pre-cancerous hyperplasia and then slowly transforms into cancer. The hallmark symptom is bleeding when you shouldn't bleed. It is diagnosed using a pelvic ultrasound and endometrial sampling. It is ranked by grading how differentiated the cells are and staged by the extent of spread. And treatment depends on its grade and stage. So I've laid the groundwork for our discussion on prognosis or fortune telling. I think it's very interesting that even though endometrial uterine cancer is the most common gynecologic cancer, it is not the subject of much attention from women in general. I mean, before you started learning about it here, how much was it on your radar? This just goes to show you that your focus is usually guided by society, and society's focus is usually all wrong. So here you have the #1 gynecologic cancer with 3 very common risk factors, but women don't give it much attention. And we're at the point of discussing the long-term outcomes of women who get endometrial uterine cancer. Prognosis is the term we use in medicine. Prognosis is the long-term outcome of a disease. It takes into account all the factors that characterize a disease, from its incidence, to the risk factors, to the symptoms, to the ability to diagnose it, to the available treatments, etc. So the prognosis is like your forecast, or more playfully, your fortune. So taking all that I've taught you thus far into account, see if you can answer this quiz question. Generally speaking, the prognosis for endometrial uterine cancer is A, poor because of the advanced age of the women who get it. B, good because of the symptom of bleeding to reveal it. C, poor because of the high incidence of cases due to frenetic genetics. D, good because of diagnosis by ultrasound and endometrial sampling. E, poor because it is caused by excess estrogen. G, good because it tends to spread locally. G, poor because it tends to spread by lymph and blood. H, good because most cases are discovered at early stages. I, highly variable depending on the weight of the patient. J, A, C, E, and G above. K, B, D, F, and H. L, A, C, E, G, and I. M, B, D, F, H, and I. Which option seems most reasonable to you given what you've learned thus far? Well, here's the answer in bold. So by and large, endometrial uterine cancer has a fairly good prognosis. It portends a good fortune. And this is because there is an obvious early symptom to alert you to the possibility of it. There are readily available diagnostic tests to diagnose it. It tends to spread locally, making it easier to treat surgically, and most cases are diagnosed very early. If I were telling your fortune with regard to endometrial uterine cancer, it would most likely be a good fortune. This is one of the reasons you knew so little about it before learning it here. But what if you had to venture a guess as to the most significant reason it is associated with a good prognosis? Which of these would it be? Time for another quiz question. The most significant reason for the overall good prognosis of endometrial uterine cancer is A, the early symptom of bleeding, B, the ability to diagnose it when it is only pre-cancer, C, its tendency for local spread rather than distant spread, D, all of the above, E, two of the above, F, none of the above. Makes you think, doesn't it? That's what I love about quiz questions. They're all logical options, aren't they? And that's precisely why the answer is all of the above. So, even though endometrial uterine cancer is common, the vast majority are diagnosed when they are either precancerous hyperplasia or dysplasia, or when they are still localized to the uterus. The biggest key to a good fortune is an early diagnosis. The very reason most endometrial uterine cancers are diagnosed as precancers or limited to the uterus is because bleeding when you shouldn't bleed is such an obvious symptom that drives women to their doctors in a flash. As many as 75% of visits to the gynecologist are for some type of bleeding. And this makes the likelihood of diagnosing bleeding that is due to endometrial uterine cancer or precancer very high. Early stage is by far the factor that portends a good prognosis with just about any cancer. 65% of endometrial uterine cancers are diagnosed at a very early stage that is treatable by surgery alone, and that's because it spreads locally. The 5-year survival rate for early endometrial uterine cancer is 97%. That's excellent. And when the bleeding is diagnosed as hyperplasia, the tendency on the parts of both doctors and patients is to err on the side of over-treating rather than under-treating. So women with endometrial hyperplasia commonly have a hysterectomy. And since a hysterectomy, whether total, meaning removing your entire uterus and cervix, or partial, meaning removal of your uterus only but sparing your cervix, removes the very source of the endometrial uterine cancer, and it avoids later cases of it. Alternatively, many women opt for endometrial ablation, which is very effective for removing the endometrial lining without having to undergo major surgery or a hysterectomy. Now granted, endometrial ablation does not erase your risk for other types of uterine cancer. Even cases of endometrial uterine cancer that are more advanced have a better prognosis than one would expect for cancers in general. And for those, the prognosis is heavily dependent on the choice of treatment. Surgery plus radiation therapy plus chemotherapy results in the best survival rates and prognosis. Surgery plus chemotherapy results in better prognoses than surgery plus radiation therapy. And another factor to consider within the realm of prognosis is recurrence. For every stage of cancer, the probability of recurrence increases. With endometrial uterine cancer, recurrence depends largely on the choice of treatment, but is generally good. The most common statistic used for survival rates is the 5-year survival rate. It's not a perfect measure, but it does a good job of looking at the short-term future of cancer patients. So it's your immediate fortune. But the term survival rate is one of those statistical terms that people do not understand very well. If I say that the survival rate of stage 1 endometrial uterine cancer is 97%, what does that mean to you? Time for yet another quiz question. If your doctor tells you that you have a 97% 5-year survival rate for your stage 1 endometrial uterine cancer, it means that A, 97% of women who have stage 1 endometrial uterine cancer will be disease-free in 5 years. In other words, the 97% pertains to the percentage of women who will be cured. B, you have a 97% probability of still being alive in 5 years. The 97% pertains to your individual probability of surviving for another 5 years. C, 97% of women with stage 1 endometrial uterine cancer survive for another 5 years. In other words, 97% pertains to the population statistics. D, 97% of the time women with stage 1 endometrial uterine cancer are still alive in 5 years. In other words, the 97% refers to the frequency or time. E, A and B above. F, B and C above. G, none of the above. Do you see how those options mean very different things? This is why it's so important to understand what a survival rate is. Here's the answer in bold. So a survival rate designates the percentage of people who survive a certain type of cancer for a specific period of time. A 5-year endometrial uterine cancer survival rate tells you the percentage of women who are still alive 5 years after their diagnosis. It's much more scientific and accurate than telling a fortune with a crystal ball. Now, one of the quiz answer options referred to being disease-free. Well, the opposite of being disease-free after treatment for endometrial uterine cancer is having a recurrence of the disease. A recurrence of endometrial uterine cancer is when the cancer returns after you've treated it. So recurrence rates are yet another aspect of prognosis, and they depend largely on grade, stage, and choice of treatment. You could have a high-grade and high-stage cancer that recurs because it is so aggressive and advanced, even though you underwent the most effective treatment. Or you could have a low-grade and low-stage cancer that recurs because you did not receive adequate treatment. Either way, recurrence affects your prognosis. But the grade and stage of the recurrence matter too. So even when endometrial uterine cancer is not diagnosed early, the local spread lends itself to low recurrence rates and high survival rates. So if we put overall recurrence rates and survival rates for endometrial uterine cancer on our chart, it looks like this. The chart's getting pretty complicated, isn't it? Here you see recurrence and survival rates for endometrial uterine precancer and cancer added to the chart that we've been building over the last few videos. The figures are very approximate. The goal is to give you an idea of how significantly recurrence and survival change from one stage to another. Notice that the 5-year survival rate is over 50% all the way to and partially through stage 3. That is not something you'll find with most cancers. Overall, the 5-year survival rate for endometrial uterine cancer is quite good. You can find a link to this chart in the description box just below the screen, or you can go to menopausetailor.me where you'll find all my charts. So, because endometrial uterine cancer is so responsive to treatment, you can have a good fortune even at more advanced stages of disease. So, the summary for today is that, generally speaking, endometrial uterine cancer has a good prognosis. This is primarily due to the fact that the early symptom of bleeding and the common diagnosis at the pre-cancer stage lend themselves to definitive treatments that prevent recurrence and enhance survival. When endometrial uterine cancer is not diagnosed early, the local spread lends itself to low recurrence rates and high survival rates. This is why you won't see endometrial uterine cancer on the list of 10 most unwanted diseases made by most doctors. So now you know all the things that are necessary for you to consider your options for preventing endometrial uterine cancer. So next week we'll surge ahead and start addressing prevention and management options. As usual, I'll present individual videos for each category of prevention and management options. So patiently watch them all and you'll be all set. If you have any kind of uterine cancer, do not use just these videos as your guide. Schedule a consultation at menopausetailor.me. I cannot tailor everything specifically to you in a video, but I can in a consultation. So I'll be delighted to help you. Other than that, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, and Instagram. And you can and should subscribe to my newsletter as well as to my channel. Your fortune is that you'll come back next week. Bye!